From Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Christie's Poirot to Bandyopadhyay's Byomkesh Bakshi and Ray's Feluda. From Ayer's Jane and Carroll's Alice to R.K. Narayan's Swami. While we follow our own journeys with stories, what remains much after with us are these characters. Namaskar. Welcome to another session of KLF Bhava Samvad, and I'm your host, Lipika Bhushan. With me today are two wonderful writers who have been sketching characters after characters with sensitivity and passion for years now. Yes, why I talk about characters today is because the topic of our discussion today is a very fascinating one. Every face has a story, every story has a face. Let me go to introducing both the writers and their works quickly before we get them to share their experiences with the innumerable characters that they create. With me today is Richa Gupta. Richa has published her first novel called Phoenix, inspired by the plight of women in India who face discrimination after a failed marriage under the pseudonym Aarti Chuppai. That's very interesting, and we'll get down to talking to her about that a little later. Since that point in time, she has had a novel out and two anthologies to her credit. Her latest book is again an anthology. The one previous to it called Slices of Life, and the current one, which is called The Geometry and Other Stories, are both collections that range from futuristic science fiction to grim realistic fiction to a suspenseful whodunit and even love stories. Richa has been into technical editing, instructional design, corporate training, and creative writing for close to 3 decades. I also have with me Rajesh Talwar. Rajesh has written 29 books, and which include novels, children's books, plays, self-help books, and non-fiction. And they cover a range of issues, right from social justice, culture, and law. Law, because Rajesh is a trained lawyer, and he's a deputy legal advisor to the United Nations on the mission in Afghanistan. Most recent of his book is called Star-Crossed Lovers in the Blue. We'll get chatting more about that particular book a little later. Rajesh has contributed to the Economic Times, to the Guardian, Pioneer, and two of his books have found, have been picked up by production houses for converting them into, I think, movies or series, one of the two. So, welcome, Richa. Welcome, Rajesh.
Thank you, Lipika. Thank you for the welcome. Glad to be here.
I think we've lost Rajesh. Rajesh is facing some network issues, but while we get him back on screen, let me start with you, Richa. Uh, your books are largely on women and their plight and their struggles. Not just that, it covers range of women from some smart ones to some really, broken ones. What brings in this perceptiveness to your characters? What is it that, firstly, why do you, mostly write on women, and then what is it that brings in that perceptiveness into the characters that you write?
Okay. So the answer to that is I think women have far more challenges to overcome than men because of the Indian setup that we have. And besides that, I think that they are much more emotional and, if I may say so, intellectual than their counterparts. Because men, firstly, they are very stoic. They don't really reveal their emotions, and you don't get to know what they're feeling. women are far more invested in life. They identify passionately, firstly with family, then with work. So they are very passionately invested in life. Men are little aloof, and I do have male characters as well, but I feel that the reality of women it has not been explored in our fiction so far. They are largely objectified. It is just a very few books where they take the main role and where their inner feelings etc are analyzed or discussed. And women have such a vast range. They are so complex, and so they are so multifaceted that there's so much to explore about them. They can be very caring, yet they can be very ambitious. So there's a whole lot to explore about their life and their characters, which I think our fiction doesn't do justice to, and our society also doesn't do justice to. So that is why I sort of concentrate on women characters, because I feel there's so much about them that has not been brought forth in our fiction. So if that answers your question.
So that brings me back to the question that I wanted to ask while introducing you, and that was about your book Phoenix and writing it under a pseudonym called Aarti Chuppai. Tell us a bit more about that. Why did you choose to do something like that, and how I mean, I'm sure there were characters in it that you didn't want, to publicly talk about. And was that the reason behind it? What was the reason to in the first place, write something directly out of your own life, and then writing it under a pseudonym?
Well, when I started writing the book, I was just writing of things which I had seen around me, things which had happened, things which I had experienced or had seen other people experience. I never thought that it would provoke a reaction among, some people. But it did provoke a lot of reaction, and a lot of negativity was generated among some people who thought that I was talking about them. And actually I wasn't. I was just taking traits from them, but it was my imagination plus reality. It was a mixture of fact and fiction, but they thought that I was directly hitting out at them, and they were very sensitive about it. They took umbrage. At that time I didn't really have the confidence. It was my first book and I didn't want to anger anybody, so I said the better way to publish it as well as keep them happy is to publish it under a pseudonym, so that they won't feel that I identified them in the book as somewhat in a negative manner, because it
So,
was
so
a
that
reality around me,
so
so I wanted
does
to
that
depict it.
happen? Does that happen very often with writers? I mean, they pick characters, and that is exactly why I think we chose to talk on the subject of every face having a character and every
Yes,
character
it
having
does
a face.
happen very often with writers, but usually the author has to have the gumption to go ahead and say that,
Yeah.
this is what I've written and this is what I'm going to publish no matter what. At that stage probably I did not have that gumption. Now if I were to write it, I would never publish it under a pseudonym. I would say, so what, this is something that happens around me. It's not only you, it is probably 50, 60 families that this thing is happening in. So I'm not targeting you. I'm targeting a perception in society, some existing facet of society which I want to depict you know so now I do have that confidence to say, okay, doesn't matter, let them get upset. But at that point I didn't. At that point they felt targeted and I didn't want to hurt them. So that was the reason for using a pseudonym, and not even revealing my identity till the next book, till a year later.
So going further into this subject of picking up characters from real life, and uh, I've largely seen, and since you were into training for creative writing, as
Yeah.
well. Is it a natural inclination for people to first write about themselves and then start exploring, multitude of characters? Because even in your case, I see that your first book was more about your life, and then now slowly you've gone into a segment where you have multiple lives to explore through your short stories. So
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think every author starts out with himself. That's the life he knows best. That is those are the characters he knows best, those around him. So, your first writing is always sort of centered around yourself. And then you move away, you gradually move away and you open yourself out to other influences, and your characters start taking shape from, other influences around you or from your imagination. But I think the first starting point is yourself. That is the starting point.
okay. Now coming to the next bit about when you sit down, and that's more technical, when you sit down and sketch your characters or start working on a story idea and sketching your characters around it. Uh, why don't you share a few things that you keep in mind, especially for those who are watching and would like to explore writing and getting published? What do you do? What is the practice that you follow?
Okay. So, characters, I believe, are very, very important to a story because it is the human element that really touches the reader. Even if it is an action-based story, it is the human element that the reader will get involved with, and that will touch the reader. When he or she is reading the story. It's all right to keep the interest going. The action has to be there, but it is the character that they will relate to. So first of all, I choose very relatable characters. I mean, these are characters which we see around us. I see, like, and they're from every section of society. My characters range from the very marginalized society to the very elite, and from the humble background to the very urbanized and modernized backgrounds. So they are all characters that you can relate to. For example, there may be a maid. I used to have a maid at one time, and she narrated to me a story about how she faced a lot of problem with her husband. Now, it was a short narration, maybe 3, 4 lines, but it stayed with me. And one of my stories now is based on that, because I'm imagining what happens to her when she goes home and what her family life is like. So there is one story in this new anthology, The Jamun Tree, where one of the stories is based on a lady who's working as a maid in a household, cleaning, doing the cleaning job. And then she returns home one day, surprisingly, very early. And then she finds her house in total disarray. Her daughter is licentious and involved with somebody. The husband is into, having some intoxicant, and she realizes that this must be happening every day. So to confirm that, then she hides herself the next day because she has already claimed that she's ill in that household where she works and taken a leave. So she hides herself and she observes what happens, in her house in her absence. And this is something which came to me from the short narration of my maid, because she told me that her husband was taking intoxicants, he blew up all her money on it. And it was just a very brief narration, but it set my imagination working. So many of my characters, they actually stem from the impetus, or the stimulus for the character stems from real life. But then my imagination takes its own course. So the rest of it, the licentious daughter and all that, that is something which I imagined, but there were hints of it from somebody else's story, some other maid's story. So I was here penning a story which was very relatable because it showed the life that these people really lead. Similarly, there's another story of the Jamun tree. Now, this is related to Jamun tree, which was there in the compound of my parents' house. And it was, it was very integrated with our life. We used to break the jamuns and eat it during the season that they fruitified. And also, what happened to the jamun tree later? Like, after my mother passed away, I fought tooth and nail to preserve this jamun tree because I didn't want it to be destroyed. But everybody kept telling me, you're going to lose valuable parking space. How are you going to, keep the jamun tree there? It's going to interrupt into this and that, and it'll create a mess when the fruits fall, and it's a very messy tree. Please remove it. I said, no, this is 45 years old, 50 years old. Even if I get permission, I will not remove it. You modify all my plans, but I will not remove the tree. But somebody else might not do so. They might say, okay, let's do away with it. We'll get more parking space for our cars, and we'll have, more area, built up area, and things like that. So, from that triggered off my imagination, that what if the tree were to be destroyed? What would happen? How would, I mean, would the tree have had feelings? Would it have felt sad that it has lost, and that it has been totally uprooted, and it has lost the family that it stayed with, and that it has been uprooted from the place where it stood for so many years? So that set off my imagination again. So again, the stimulus came from real life, but the story is something which I wove on my own. So that is the starting point. Now here too, the characters are not too vested in the tree. They don't really care, as long as they are okay. They are okay with it being destroyed as well. So, mistakenly, they just happen to destroy the tree because they moved the excavation too close to the tree, so it falls in. And that is again a character and an incident which I have used my imagination to imagine, but started the starting point has been real life. So most of my characters start from real life, but end up being mixed with fiction and made into an interesting story. But I feel all my characters are relatable. You can relate to them as people whom you know or whom you've met, and whom you can identify with, their problems, their issues, and their challenges.
In fact, your this incident that you narrated from your personal life about the Jamun tree reminds me of my conversation with Dr. Kalam. We were working on a book with him, and I'd gone to pay him a visit. And there was this,
Uh-huh.
I think, almost 100-year-old, not a jamun tree, but a 100-year-old tree in his right outside in the courtyard. And
Okay.
he said something very similar to what you're saying. He says that this tree, every morning and evening I speak to him, I talk to him, and I share my likes, dislikes, beliefs with him. Um,
Okay.
and now hearing you, it's like so surreal at times, to find similar incidents from different lives. And that is why the next question are how do you develop? In fact, I will not ask the cliched question of are writers more sensitive and perceptive. That I think is quite natural, and that is why they are able to bring out books. But how to develop this art? How to develop the art of being able to absorb your surroundings little differently than what maybe regular people do. I mean, non-writing people do.
You have to have the sensitivity, and you have to be awakened to what's happening around you. And I think that happens naturally in some people. Like, I'm very alive, like, alive to what's happening around me. If I see something, it registers, and then when I'm just sitting and writing, it comes back to me, and I say, what if this were to happen in that case? And for developing characters, first of all, I think they all have to be given a social setting. You have to talk about the milieu that they come from. Otherwise, they are unreal. They're hanging in the air. So you have to firstly place them in a defined milieu so that they are identifiable as, and their problems, their problems and issues and talk about their problems and issues as if, um, uh, I mean, as if they are real ones and which the character is wrestling with or trying to deal with. So if that comes through, then the reader will identify with the character. But where you don't have that identification, the character is just vague and not really well defined, that is where the problem comes, and that is why so many, I think, so many stories, they're very erratic. They start and stop, they start and stop, and there's no continuity in character development as well. Suddenly the character behaves in a peculiar way and then in another way, and there's no explanation for why they are behaving in that way. So that becomes unrelatable. So if you give them a defined milieu, if you talk about their psychological issues, their other issues, and describe them as having describe their feelings and describe their emotions and their complexities in an identifiable manner, that is a way that readers will identify with and then sympathize with that character. Then they'll reach out to, they'll identify with the character and whatever the character is going through, they'll become vested in the story. Otherwise they lose interest in the story.
At this point, why don't you introduce us to one of your characters and read something from your book?
Okay, sure. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read something from this story that I've called Breaking News. Now, again, this is something that happens in real life. We have journalists running after scoops and trying to get the scoop at any cost, doing everything possible to outdo the other channel and get more news on their channel, get breaking news. So I have this character of a journalist who's also trying to get this kind of news, and how he sort of deals with this mission of his. So this is a story called Breaking News, and it goes this way. I'm reading the start of the story, and then, of course, I don't want to read the concluding part because I want the readers to go through that themselves. The 5 phases of the general election were round the corner, and political discourse was at a feverish pitch. Amitabh Bhandari, a lead investigative journalist with the news channel AG Media, noted the politician Raghav Bhatia, conveniently seated on a side seat in the second row, crouch and move towards the side exit of Convention Hall. Given his surreptitious exit, Amitabh wondered if he could garner some newsworthy information on the leader of the Bahu Sanskriti Sangh, BSS, the largest opposition party in parliament. There had been no expose on AG Media after their coverage 2 weeks before of the gold smuggling racket involving a minister. Usually, this tracking and reporting was left to the junior reporters, but Amitabh had a fetish for finding some dirt on Raghav. After becoming the foremost stalwart of the BSS party at the relatively young age of 43, Raghav had not even had a whiff of corruption linked to his name and had seemingly achieved his objective of transparency and honesty in party conduct. Amitabh found it hard to believe that an honest politician had surfaced in the muddy waters of Indian politics. According to him, it implied Raghav had not been caught out as yet. Perhaps this was the occasion. He emerged from the hall and followed Raghav wearing the traditional garb of politicians, a white kurta, as he turned left and headed down the street. Articulate and intelligent, despite his middle class upbringing in the small town of Panipat, Raghav had joined Delhi University for graduation and post graduation in political science. While most youngsters were averse to becoming politicians, believing that they were either corrupt or belonged to a political family, he had decided that India needed a well educated and committed politician like him, who would change the political ethos with his idealism. So he had joined the BSS, a national party committed to reviving the historic glory of India. So, if you see, this is the initial exposition in the story of the two characters who are going to play the lead roles here. That is the stalwart of the opposition party and the journalist who wants to find out something intriguing about him and follows him to do so. So you can say that any character exposition usually happens at the beginning of the story, and then we see the development, and then the twists and turns, which are a necessity of every story.
I think Rajesh has been trying to connect and reconnect. There is some serious challenge he's facing with the internet, but while he continues to try, let me now just go on to the subject of studying your character from day to day life. What so when you are observing the people around you, when you are observing them, closely, and at the same time developing a character, what is it that you fictionalize in the character, and what stays? How do you decide that?
See, it is all a very organic unit. It depends on the story that you're writing. So, supposing I'm writing something about like breaking news, if I'm writing something about, the exposes that happen on media, then naturally I've got to have a politician character. I've got to have a journalist who's, investigating. So, first of all, I think when I start off with the story, I think the story comes first. What am I writing about? And then according to that, I think of characters. And when I'm developing my characters, these real life characters come automatically into my mind. Now, when I was developing the character of this politician, some well known politicians came into my mind. So I described him as wearing a white kurta. I described him as moving surreptitiously. I described him as, going under cover of darkness, all those things. And I described him meeting a political crony in a hotel room, because these are things which you read about. So the story is my own, but a lot of influence is from the daily happenings which I see around me. Then the investigative journalist, is so well known today. We've seen so many of them on the television and the media all the time, and they're trying to outdo one another. So, some characteristics come into the character development when I'm developing them. So there's no clearly defined line between, fact and fiction here, but it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of what I've observed, what I've seen happening, and my own imagination. So here, maybe I made him the lead investigative journalist of a very popular media house. Uh, Probably, there are so many of these who conduct debates on the television, and they have a loud debate in which they outshout the opposition, and they have a lot of investigation going on, scoops they declare, and then the scoop turns out to be something very abysmal. So something comes from there, something comes from what I've seen on the television, and something is my own imagination.
What are the characters that stay with you? I mean, for a reader, I do understand, and I'm sure we'll also get to that as to what the readers have often pointed out to you, maybe, the feedback that they've given about the characters that you've written. But what are the characters that continue to stay with you even after uh, done with them? You've sketched them and you've completed
In
the
my own
story,
work, you
and
mean? In my
yeah.
own work. Okay, so in the Jamun tree, first of all, I identified there's a story called The Interview, my second story, in which, there is a woman who is on a mission, and she uses her attractive looks to get what she wants. Her end is very justified. She wants justice for her fiance who's been murdered, or her live in partner who's been murdered. But to do that, the course that she adopts, that is very intriguing. And I think that character has stayed with me. And many people have told me that they found this story the best among the in the compilation of stories. So it's a character that has stayed with me for Meghna. I called her Meghna, and I called the journalist who is talking to her Jayant. So she uses Jayant as a means to get her justice for her murdered ex-partner. So how she uses him and the methods that she uses are very innovative, in her circumstances, because she is also a target now. She is also a target for the people who killed her fiance or her ex-partner. So she has to be careful. And how she still manages, in spite of all these adversities, to do what she wants. So that character has stayed with me. And the jamun tree has stayed with me. The jamun tree, I identify with it so much. And the destruction of the jamun tree, it made me feel that, oh, that is what nearly happened to my jamun tree. So that has stayed with me. These two characters are really, Meghna and the jamun tree have really stayed with me even after I finished the book.
What are the characters or stories that influence your writing? Other than, I mean, which are the other writers or the characters that have stayed, and you've tried to, emulate them or go forward with them in your stories in your own way, have sketched them in your own manner?
Okay, so I have been influenced by a variety of authors. Firstly, I've read a variety of authors, and I've been influenced by so many of them that is why I feel I can write in different genres. For example, even in this book, I have written a whodunit, a murder mystery, where it's revealed at the end who has committed the murder. That is because of the influence of Agatha Christie and her novels. Then I am very influenced by multi-generational sagas, like Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, Min Jin Lee's Pachinko. That's a recent novel that I read, which deals with, generations of the family, the grandmother and then the daughter and then the grandchildren, and how they and their lives. So these multi-generation. Then there's Colin McCullough's Thornbirds. That's also a multi-generational saga. So the characters in them are all very strong characters. For example, Scarlett O'Hara is a character which is so strong. And I mean, it has been so well defined that you feel almost as if she's a real person. Sorry. So I am influenced by characters like this. And then I find Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, even though I've read it long back and it's a forgotten classic, people don't like to read it because it talks of a bygone era. But I still cannot forget the main characters, Elizabeth and her sister and Darcy. They are very strongly defined, and then the surprising revelation about Darcy at the end. The reader is so intrigued by the slow revelation of his character, and how we form prejudices right in the beginning about people, and then gradually how we alter them as we know them better. That comes through so beautifully in this book. So I cannot define any one author. There are so many that I've sort of been influenced by, and who have got Ayn Rand. um, her characters are Fountainhead. Her characters in Fountainhead are very well defined. So there are so many of them, and even the short stories. I think the short stories of Hector Hugh Munro, Saki, Catherine Mansfield, Arkinarayan Swamy and Friends, so heartwarming.
True, true.
such a lovely setting of an Indian village, and so simple people, and it's a very heartwarming story, and I really identify with Swami, and his friends, and all that happens in their little town Malgudi. So that, I mean, I can just go on and on.
Tell me something about writing short stories now. I mean, your last two books have been anthologies. Um,
Mhm.
and before that, you've written a novel. What is more difficult? Is it difficult to write a long form, or it's difficult to create
A
several
novel is
characters?
a longer, it's a longer piece of fiction, so you have to keep it going for a very long time. Short stories you can finish fast and you can move on to the next and start afresh. So short stories are definitely easier, but they also involve craft. They also involve expertise in a certain, of a certain kind. So I am enjoying writing short stories now, and I don't understand why people consider it a lesser form of fiction. I mean, if they're well written, they can be so engrossing. And, the thing is that you can read them in between tasks. You can, even I can write them in between my multiple activities without, it disrupting the continuity of it. For a novel, you've got to concentratedly write on it for at least a few months. And then, it's a much longer process. So I would say that I'm loving writing short stories. You know, it's easier, convenient.
Why, why don't you at this point maybe also pick another story of yours and read a few passages? Uh, Maybe
Okay,
from something which is different than what you read the last time.
all
Maybe the
right.
murder mystery. If you can just open the murder
Oh,
mystery
the
for
murder.
people and then let them go on to it a little later.
All right. So
While you look for the page, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so this is actually the last story in the collection is a murder mystery, and it's called Cracked. It's titled Crackdown. So it's about a businessman, and he's suddenly murdered, and how the news is brought to his house and how the people react to it. Her frail, grey haired, and wrinkled, pleasant face looked abstract as the dowager clutched a photograph close to her chest and repeated ad infinitum. My baby's photo. He must be on his way home. Supriya asked the cook to get his lunch ready. The photograph she clasped was of her son Pavan, clicked a week before by Supriya, just before he left for office and printed out for a club membership form. It showed a tall and well built man, around 45, with well defined, pleasant features and grey flecked hair in a blue shirt and grey trousers. Vani's shock and grief on hearing of her son's sudden demise, combined with her frail constitution, had led to a delirium. Her son, who had bid her goodbye and left home as usual 4 hours before, had been stabbed to death in his car by two unknown assailants who had fled thereafter. Her psychological denial of the ghastly news had led to a delusion that he would return soon. Pavan's widow Supriya, a tall and doughty woman always engaged in work, roused herself from her grief to assure her, Mom, I'm here with you, and see, Smriti is here too. Smriti, herself distraught but concerned about her grandmother, closer to Vani, put a arm around her and rested her head on her shoulder. Who are you? Where is Pavan? Did he call to say when he would return? In this transport, ever since Supriya had arrived with a frantic look, wringing hands, and the sad news of Pavan's demise. Their driver, who had driven Pavan to the hospital with stab wounds in his chest, had summoned Supriya and the police. By the time she had reached the hospital, the doctors had announced Pavan clinically dead due to mortal wounds. She had to go through several formalities before his body was taken for a post mortem, and she could return home with her brother Dheeraj, whom she she had summoned, and two senior police officers. So, this is the start of the story when the murder is announced to the family and the mother goes into a delirium. And then it gets
From
unraveled
this,
what had happened. Sorry.
so deriving from this and one another story that I read in your latest book about a mother losing her child and trying to overcome that grief. Now these are situations with characters where, and I mean, where we say that writers are perceptive and they absorb experiences around you or pick experiences from others experiences, but these need a much more deeper understanding, and everything of course you cannot have a first hand experience of, or have people around you who have had a first hand experience of. So in such cases, what kind of research goes into developing that character and in a particular situation or setup?
Well, even if we have not faced the exact loss that we are talking about, all of us have faced loss at some time in our lives, or we have made some error which we have deeply regretted. I think each of us has that experience. So I might be describing a different kind of loss in the story that I'm writing. But I've been through those emotions myself. I've been through feelings of loss and I've been through feelings of recouping and recovering from that loss also. You know, you may have you may lose a relative, you may lose your parents, you may lose somebody you've known, or even if you don't lose them, you may be affected by something that you've done which is very tragic, which has caused a lot of problems and which has had severe repercussions. So you draw from that. I drew from that. I drew from my experience of loss when I was writing this. And how did I overcome it? So here also the character who experiences loss overcomes it due to the support of her friend and her husband and her inclination towards music, her talent in music. So that helps her overcome the loss. So it's something similar is what I also experienced, because even I had somebody to support me, and then I had my art to go back to, I had my writing to go back to. So that kept you going, that kept me going. So this is how I describe the character who continues to, go on with life, because loss is a part of life. You have to deal with it, and you learn through experience how to deal with it. When you experience loss, you also feel there's nothing left for you. What is there in life now for you? But then you slowly overcome that feeling and you gradually start finding pleasure. You start enjoying things. You start, again living. So it is a feeling, I think, that we all of us have gone through. Maybe writers are more, they analyze themselves much more. That's the difference.
It would have been nice to have Rajesh also come in on several of these questions, because I've read him, and all our books, all his books on, in different genres are have these characters that are very refinedly developed, and it would have been nice to have his perspective today as well, but unfortunately I think he's not being able to join us. If we
Right.
have any questions, it'll be nice to have them on screen, and then I can take that up. We have Aditya Bharat. Hi Aditya. He's saying how your characters drive you in the novel. That's a very nice question. Do
Yeah.
characters, so primarily do characters come to you, or and then do they take the story forward, or you have a certain style of ensuring that it is you create an outline and then could fit the characters in?
Actually, I start out with the action. I start out with with what the story is about, the theme, the overall theme, not the action, but the theme. And then then the characters are integral and they automatically, there's a very organic fit into each other. The characters will be such that go with the theme, you know. So sometimes, what they do propels the story forward, and sometimes the story leads to the development of the character. So both of them are integrated, you know, because it is when the character develops and that, you know, and when they take action, that the story too moves forward. And when the story moves forward, the character is also sometimes revealed and, you know, takes you see more hues of the character. So they are both very integrated, and both can take the lead. Either the story can take the lead or the character can take the lead, but they both progress together.
There's a joke that I think a lot of authors share, and that is, if you bug me, I'm going to kill you in my story. how many times do you how many times do you face something similar from people who might have identified themselves in your books, and they've come back to you and um,
Well, after the first book, I've had no problems with people identifying themselves because I've never used a character as, you know, I've just taken traits from here and there, but rest of it is my imagination. So thankfully, I've not faced it after the first book. It was only in the first book that, you know, some people were offended. Yes.
at that point, I think it brings us closer to the end of the session. We would have had more fun had Rajesh joined us. But thank you so much, Richa. I think it's always a pleasure, diving deeper into the subject with you, especially because you have not only written books, but you train, people to write them. There have been a lot of young students that have passed out and have written books who are your students. So
Yeah.
it's always fascinating to have conversations around the skill, the art of writing, and going beyond just um, the subject covered in the book. Well, I congratulate you on your new book, and I do hope that a lot of people pick it up and read it. The Jamun Tree and Other Stories. It's a collection of short stories, an anthology, and it has a very nice, feedback from Shrutapa, a quote from Shrutapa, and Shrutapa Basu is another writer. Thank you very much. I would also like to any parting suggestions or advice or words on characters and stories. Any parting suggestions that you have?
I'd like to say one quote here. You know, I think that has really stayed with me. It's a quote that's by Stephen King, which says, "Fiction is the truth inside the lie." You know, it is actually depicting something true, but within a
True, that has happened.
camouflage by fiction. So I really think that is so apt. That fiction is the
How
truth
beautifully
inside
put.
the lie.
Yeah. How beautifully put. That should be the perfect end to this session. I would like to thank Kalinga Literature Festival for hosting this session. I think they're doing a great job. Rashmi Ranjanji, his team, of Ashutosh, Satansu. Thank you so much for setting this up and ensuring that we have a smooth flow. Again, we miss you, Rajesh. It would have been fun had you joined in today, but I think that's the problem being faced with most of us who are working from remote areas these days. Connectivity does once in a while create hassles in our communication. Thank you once again. Thanks, Richa. And thank you once again, Kalinga Literature Festival, Bhav Samvad. See you the next time.
Thank you, Lipika, and thank you, Kalinga, festival, literary festival. Thank you very much.